We are live.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. We were 1 minute late, so I'm very proud of ourselves. Um, and thank you for tuning in for our Black Queer Boy Joy discussion. If you don't know, if we haven't met, my name is Robert. I use he, him pronouns. And on behalf of MAX Ottawa, welcome to the discussion. Um, Vincent, who is my co-host, is going to introduce themselves later. Very shortly, I should say. But first and foremost, we wanted to start the ground the discussion off with our land acknowledgement. So beginning with Max, it's with gratitude and respect that Max Ottawa acknowledges that we are on the traditional unceded and unsurrendered territories that belong to the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. We know that this land is home today to many diverse First Nations, Indigenous, and Inuit individuals, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in this territory.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Vincent Mousseau. You can call me Vince. My pronouns are they and them. En français, j'utilise les pronoms yel avec les accords masculins. I also want to do a land acknowledgement because this is something that I believe is integral to our practice. RÉZO is based in Tiohtià, which is colonially referred to as Montreal, Quebec. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, also referred to as the Mohawk, are recognized as the custodians of this land, of the lands and waters on which we gather. This unceded territory is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today it is a home to diverse populations of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community.
Thank you, Vincent. It's such a um, um, moment too. I was feeling really anxious today just because, and so um, it's really grounding, I think, to start off with a land acknowledgement, just being aware of um, where you are, who you're at. So I appreciate that. Not that I was nervous about the discussion, but it's nice to start off with that energy of acknowledgement and gratitude and respect.
Really
Cool. So yeah, do you want to share some housekeeping rules and talk with the audience?
Totally. We're going to be going for approximately an hour. We're going to be speaking for about, I'd say about 45 minutes ish, if we can somehow maintain to be able to rein ourselves in and take questions. So we're monitoring the chat on the Facebook Live. So please feel free to type any comments in, and we're more than welcome to and we're more than willing to read those out. We're also going to be uploading this video to YouTube in the next few weeks. We're not sure of an exact date, but the reason it's going to take a bit longer than it normally does with Max's stuff is that we're going to be translating our entire conversation into French and subtitling it so that the primarily Francophone audience of my organization, RÉZO, can have access to that, as well as, of course, Franco-Ontarian communities and the Gatineau community as well. J'aimerais aussi juste traduire ça vite fait. Donc, une traduction sera faite en français, sous-titrée. Max va mettre la vidéo sur leur chaîne YouTube. Ça va être partagé aussi sur les réseaux de réseau. Si vous avez des questions et vous voulez poser des questions spécifiquement en français, n'hésitez pas à les écrire dans le chat puisqu'on est en train quand même de les vérifier et moi, je peux faire la traduction et ensuite on en discutera en anglais. Si vous avez d'autres questions, vous voulez poser des questions uniquement en français, vous exigez une réponse en français, vous pouvez m'écrire personnellement aussi. Mon courriel, c'est vincent@commercialrezosanté.org, REZOSANTE.org. Pas d'accent. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. So let's just dive right into it. So we've titled today's discussion Black Queer Boy Joy for reasons and intention. And just starting off with that, Vincent, first, forgive me, if you want to do a little bit more of an introduction about yourself, pronoun, and your work and your background.
Sure.
And then, answering the question, Black Queer Boy Joy, what does that mean to you? What resonates with you when you hear that?
Totally. Like I mentioned, my name is Vincent. My pronouns are they and them. Yel avec des accords masculins en français. I am a project officer for RÉZO, which is an organization with a very similar mandate to MAX, but based in Montreal. We are all about health and well-being for gay and bisexual men, cis and trans. And so my project is called Kominote, which is a Haitian word that means community. Our goal is to basically address existing gaps in our services. So we're partnering with organizations across Canada, notably MAX Ottawa. We're partnered with the Community-Based Research Council. We're partnered with the AIDS Committee of Toronto and HIM to work on a project that is a 5-year project that aims to target marginalized groups who are underrepresented in services and kind of bring them in and ensure that they feel welcomed and included in our services. And so we're on year 3. The mandate was that we'd be working with racialized communities, and we took the initiative to specialize that even further into ACB communities, so African, Caribbean, and Black communities. It's a really important dynamic to us, especially considering the demographics of the city of Montreal. And so since January, I've been working with RÉZO on this project, along with my colleague, Gabrielle Moujimbere. Yeah, we've been kind of trying to figure out what it is that the community needs in terms of service access and bring them in. On a more personal level, I am a registered social worker. I also work. I'm also just finishing up. I just finished up a Bachelor of Social Work at McGill University, starting up a Master of Social Work at Université de Montréal, where my thesis is going to be about the intersection of Black, queer, and trans identities and how that impacts our identity development. So that's kind of the lens that I'm bringing to a lot of this work. And so what does it mean for that kid who's been Black their whole lives to suddenly also find out I'm also queer or I'm also trans, and how is that going to impact the way that they interact with Black communities, and how is it going to interact the way that they interact with queer and trans communities and with larger society in general? And like, how do we as social workers take that? So that's kind of my work. Hearing about Black Queer Boy Joy, I love Twitter. I'm a huge Twitter fan, and so when I saw it was a hashtag, I'm like, I'm ready. And I love the Black Boy Joy as like a hashtag, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was the result of a shooting, right? There was another police shooting, and we were having a lot of discussions at that time around the ways that like Black male and male perceived bodies are really portrayed in this way that is consistently a threat. Like, it's not possible for us to be to just be people, and to be, you know, people with dreams and aspirations and hopes and things like that, right? And so Black Boy Joy for that was made in order to like kind of show that representation of like, you know what, like, we are happy, we do like having fun with our friends, we want to counter this media narrative of Black masculinity as being inherently something that is to be feared. And I think we're seeing the ramifications of that everywhere, right? I think like, I think of Black Queer Boy Joy, and the first person that comes to mind is Lil Nas X. And I think that just seeing this like unabashed like Black queer like person existing in public space and being unapologetic about their Blackness and their queerness is something that kind of like epitomizes that to me. And it's like, and like they're still able to, you know, have fun and joke around and, you know, like make like amazing music, and just, yeah, I just love it. How about you?
Nice. So very quickly, my intro, Robert, he can pronouns. I'm a registered nurse, presently working at MAX Ottawa, which, if you're not familiar, is a community-based organization. We are focused on maximizing health and wellness of gay, bi, trans, two-spirit, and queer, whether cis or trans men in the capital region, as Vincent said, similar to RÉZO. And you know, most notably, why I'm part of this discussion, not just because I'm a Black queer gay man, but I also have the pleasure of co-facilitating along with Tiohtià, Keeping It 100, which is a ACB, and thank you for explaining that earlier, Vincent, which stands for African, Caribbean, Black, which is a very popular way in Canada that we refer to people of the African diaspora. And it's been an ongoing discussion group for the last 3 years. We've been fortunate enough to move it to Zoom during the current crisis, and it's been a pleasure and a joy to be a part of that group. and keep it on going. So following along to that of Black queer boy joy, what I think of is, joy as a revolutionary act. Not something that hasn't been lost on me when you look at particularly a lot of Black queer writers, Audre Lorde, James Baldwin. I'm also thinking about Philip Pike's recent documentary, Dance Revolution. I don't know if you got a chance to see that. So good. And I love how he ended it with asking the participants, if you could describe, give 3 words to describe revolution, what would you be? And a lot of people reference joy. And I think particularly when talking about Black queer boy joy, this ability to display happiness and gratitude from a sincere place just goes against the counter narrative, right? Just what you were saying before about Black masculinity, it having to be formed and shaped in a certain way to make white people feel comfortable, but also has to look a certain way to fit in with other Black people. And certainly when you add in the narrative of queerness, of gayness, of bisexuality, of transness, that often interferes with how we're supposed to be. So to just be your goddamn self and just display that and show that, that's revolutionary. And we think of activism in so many ways, so many high-level demonstrative ways, and just being yourself as a Black queer person, existing and thriving and surviving, is revolutionary enough, right? So yeah, that's what I think of.
Yeah, and I think that really like leads us into this idea, right? Like, well, first of all, I think that like for me, it like elicits a reaction of like, our joy shouldn't be revolutionary, right? It should just be something that we're able to live and that we're able to like to kind of just express without having to worry about these things, right? And I think there is something that's really political about that is really telling about having joy express itself as a political act, right? And so that I think is something that's important to me, and I think like it's something that shows up as a result of barriers. And like this idea that like we cannot feel this joy. So like, what do these barriers look like for you? I guess is one of the questions. Or like, what are some of the things that have come up in your work as well about like expressing expressing joy in this way, and like the various things that could like impede that?
Yeah, for sure. And certainly speaking professionally and clinically, syndemic determinants of health, Kimberly Cranshaw's term that she so lovingly gave us, intersectionality. So looking at it from these really high level things, one thing that I'm reminded of is to always think about individuals, and particularly, Black queer family members, in terms of from a strength-based asset. I know even with going through nursing school, we hear so many times that like Black gay men are more arrested for this, Black queer men are arrested for that, Black trans women, have higher rates of this, and without you start to internalize that these things are your fault. It's my fault that I'm higher risk racially. It's my fault that I'm higher risk for abuse and violence. And that's not the case, right? It is because of racism. It's because of these systemic issues that lead to these inequities that don't give us the opportunities to be joyful, right? We all should be living in a world that's equitable, that we have the opportunity to do what we need to do, get the job that we want. But unfortunately, that's not the case. That's not the world that we're living in. And unfortunately, ACB people in Canada, particularly queer people, when you look at the facts and the figures, those discrepancies are really real. Therefore, making joy even more revolutionary. Yeah, and thinking, personally and specifically in Ottawa about, issues that keep displaying Black queer boy joy is that certainly there's a lot of Black people in Ottawa. Forgive me for not remembering this, but Ottawa has the largest Black population by percentage. It's the largest racial group after white people in the city. And we're certainly seeing more Black queer organizing, and we'll talk about that later for sure. But it's still pretty silent. And there's also barriers to accessing, right? There's transportation, there's, Black people are not monolithic. You're part of a diaspora. So then, you get into ethnic identity, and folks may not want to cross each other, and or thinking about disability and barriers to spaces. I'm rambling at this point, so I'll finish, but that's what comes to mind for me.
Totally. Yeah. I think there's a lot of barriers as well. I think I've been seeing a lot of them come up within our work. So I'm finishing off the research part of our project right now, and I'm looking at some of the stuff that I'm noticing. And for example, we have like a good chunk of our sample were folks with a university education, but also many of those folks made under $50,000 a year. Right. So what does that look like? Like, how are these things translating? How is this comparing to the general population? I definitely do think you're right around Ottawa being the highest percentage of ACB folks in the as a percentage of the population. I looked into this for the city of Montreal proper. It's about like Black folks are about 10% of the population. And I think we in Quebec have a really interesting dynamic that comes around as a result of this, because of course we have historic Black communities who have been here for generations. But when we look at recent immigration patterns, things like the Quebec government's control of their own immigration policy has led to an increase in migration from Francophone Africa and from Haiti and from other Francophone or colonies, countries that were formerly colonized by the French. And so like they're coming into Quebec in like a really interesting way. And that's had a really interesting impact on Black communities within the rest of within Quebec and in the rest of Canada, right? So I mean, when we look at like where Black communities come from elsewhere as well, we also can't forget like the sheer diversity of experiences that come with that, right? Like I spent the last I just got back in January, but I spent the last 4 months before that in Halifax working on programming for QT BIPOC folks, queer and trans Black, Indigenous, and other folks of color. And I had the privilege of getting to know so much more about African Nova Scotian communities who have been present in Canada for generations and are still getting asked, like, so your English is really good, or like, so where are you from, but like where are you really from, these dynamics really create this sentiment. And for me, I think this is the root of one of the challenges that I see with like achieving that joy, is that constant feeling of otherness, right? Like how do you feel happy when you're like uncomfortable on the land that you find yourself? And I think, for example, when we were mentioning like the importance of that land acknowledgement earlier, I think that also plays into us, right? Like it allow like recognizing that allows us to ground ourselves on this territory, on the territory that we find ourselves on, and also helps us to situate ourselves and kind of find I'm thinking in French, like un point de repère, a point anyway. And so I think there's something that's really important within that. And I think like for me, a lot of my like a lot of the issues with my Black experience and kind of things that have been stopping me from achieving that like Black queer boy joy have been this sense of uncertainty around my place in community and how like immigration patterns work, and like am I like I'm from Toronto originally, and I'm like from an Anglo-Caribbean country, but I'm also a transracial adoptee, which means that my parents were white and I was raised in a white family. And so now I have all of these dynamics, right? Where I'm like asking myself, like, is this mine? Is this my community? Is this a place that I can feel at home? And I think like that is something that's going to necessarily impede in our ability to kind of get there. But it is wonderful. And I think you mentioned it earlier, like Black communities in Ottawa and Black communities also in Montreal have been like taking the time and creating spaces for us to work through these questions together, to think about these things together. And I think that that's something that I really value, and I really am happy that we have the opportunity to go through right now.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And it's just quickly, just in speaking of what she said, and just I think it's important to note that Black people have been in Canada before, as long as any other groups, people that were either settler colonial or arrived here by force, recognizing that Canada did have enslaved Africans and Indigenous folks for almost 200 years. And I think, we think about sometimes spaces in very formal ways, but certainly this organizing has been going on for, such a long period of time. Give me.
So I'll take this moment to encourage folks to write any questions that they might have in the comments down below. And so if you have any questions or comments, or you're just thinking about something and you'd love to share your opinion, write it in the comments. We're monitoring them. And so we're more than willing to address them at the question period that's coming later. Et si vous avez des questions en français, n'hésitez pas. It's all you.
I like that cover. We should get a little talk show. Yeah, so just recognizing that Black queer organizing has been happening as long as Black people have been here. It's just not been acknowledged, not been recognized. And overlapping with the other point of one of the things that I think is a huge barrier to just Black joy, period, specifically Black queer boy joy, in moving here from United States and noting the differences of what it means to be Black in Canada versus in America is that is politeness and talking about racism, talking about these really strong intersectional things are not polite and therefore go against, your, not being Canadian if you're talking about these things, right? I've heard so many times since I moved here, Canada's Indigenous issues like America's Black problems. And it's like, no. In the Venn diagram of systemic prejudice and discrimination, right? They're there, but those are two very unique things, and they both definitely exist in both countries in unique and, sadly detrimental ways to both communities. And so, yeah, so I think even just having this conversation in itself is a revolutionary act, right? Just naming this.
Yeah, and I think like oftentimes we talk about like I think the comparison between Black communities and Indigenous communities is something that comes up a lot. But I think like in making that kind of like in throwing those together in that way, we're really ignoring like the things that make those communities unique, right? Like the history of the way that colonization has affected Black people is completely different from the way that like colonization has affected Indigenous people, right? So like we have all of these, like we do have like a lot of like shared things that we need to be standing in solidarity with each other for, right? Like issues of forced displacement, right? Like Black communities, we know that so intimately as like a part of our history to the point where like it's in our biology, right? Like we've created these measures to like adapt to the traumas that we've had to live through as Black folks and as descendants of people who were forcibly displaced and brought here. I think that that's something that is super key for us to like to recognize and to stand in solidarity with Indigenous folks, for example, whenever Indigenous people are being forced out of their land in order to pass some pipeline, for example. Like that level of solidarity is so key. I do think it is something that just kind of comes up a lot around this, but we need to allow ourselves to have space, right? And that's what I love about this whole hashtag and this thing is that like it centers Blackness, right? Like Black queer boy joy, when this became a thing on Twitter, I remember all those people like white, like I don't want to say, yeah, like non-Black people on Twitter finding it and being like, well, queer boy joy just generally, why does it have to be Black? It's like, no, because it does have to be Black because we're not allowed to have these spaces, right? Like they ignore the systemic stuff that comes up behind this. And so I agree that it's definitely something that is like, it's revolutionary for us to kind of claim and to create. And I think the ability of Black communities to show their resilience and to really create spaces in which we can cultivate this kind of joy and this kind of belonging is amazing. And notably, I think that brings me back to the work that I'm doing right now and the way that it ties into your stuff. I mean, when I heard about K1, Keeping It 100, as a discussion group, I was so happy. I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to be looking at this. It's going to be featured like strongly in the report that I'm writing about where programming needs to go. It served as like an inspiration. And it's so wonderful to see like Black folks taking that ownership and being like, we're going to create something by us, for us, that's going to address our needs, that's going to help us then integrate into the community. And I think that's something that's often left behind, right? Is like people just are like, oh, you're just self-segregating and creating this dynamic where you're just like, you don't want to talk to anyone else. It's like, no, we want to be able to collectively deal with the traumas that this community infringes on us so so regularly. And I love that we have the resilience in order to be able to do that and to like run our own stuff, and like the resourcefulness that comes in. I know that like we were talking about, I mean, maybe I'll let you talk a little bit more, but like I know that like K1 is basically like self-sufficient, right? Like it runs itself, it works out translation, it gets like everything figured out like by itself. And I think that's such like a goal, you know? Anyway.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a perfect segue. And for those not familiar, so the long story about K1 is that so Max has a community, Max has a program where folks can submit an application, they get a micro grant to support a project. I was new to Ottawa, signed up to volunteer, and so for Max, and so was encouraged to apply. And it just also so happened that there was a gentleman, his name's Dr. Giwa, who had just finished up some research on racialized queer men experiences that they were having in Ottawa. Max had a special event that I was able to attend, and that really helped. I mean, I'd only been here for a few months, but it really helped open some eyes in terms of like, oh, wait, there's not a lot of visible organizing, particularly for Black queer people. There was a lot of QPOC programming, which is extremely valid and needed, and whatnot. So I came up with the idea of keeping it 100, but and also recognizing that it was that I was new to Ottawa, I wanted to make sure that it was going to serve the needs of this community I just moved into. So I'm reaching out to other folks. Tiohtià Boyce is an individual who we've met through that process, who's been wonderful in co-facilitating and helping us build the group and just making sure that there was, Ottawa specific things. And so it ran as a pilot group. And because it was successful, when I started working at Max, we brought it on to full-time programming, and here we are 3 years later. And everything that you just said, I can't say it any better. It's just been a wonderful space, an imperfect space. I want to acknowledge the fact that, we all have learning to do. I've made missteps as facilitators. We try to make it as a safe space as possible, but there's also barriers to that. So I do want to acknowledge that. But it's been great. It's been 3 years of wonderful conversation, of folks feeling seen and heard, of folks having a space that they can learn from. One of the things that's coming to mind, and then I'll, because I'm really curious to hear more about your project as well, is I've had so many folks who've come through the space and said, this is my first time being in a Black queer male exclusive space. Men in their 20s, 30s, 40s, folks who've lived in Ottawa their whole life. And I say folks because we do engage with other community members. We've had Black heterosexual men join us. We've had Black queer women join us. We've had outside facilitators. So also recognizing that it's not only Black queer men that have been in this space, but I don't have anything bad to say about K1. It's wonderful, personally and professionally. So I want to hear more about the work that you're doing in Montreal.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's really important that you mention the importance of imperfect space. I think oftentimes in so many situations, we expect perfection out of Black folks, right? Like we see it in the ways that like that people are treated whenever they are in the workplace. We see it in the ways that we are expected to be like spokespeople for our communities. Like we always are meant to take ownership and to speak in the name of an entire community, right? And anything less than perfection is often picked apart, right? And we saw it again with the Arno Aubrey case in the US right now. And of course, what's going on there, I think like, and the New York Post recently pulled this thing, but put this interview out where they were like, here's this video of Arno Aubrey getting arrested in 2017 for robbery. What they don't put in their headline, of course, because nobody actually goes in and reads these articles, is that he was not charged with it. He was just stopped and controlled. And then they find out that he didn't do anything. And so, right, but this is the way that like the media shapes that narrative, right? And I think I shared this on my professional accounts, and I'm just like pulling it up now. It's a quote by Austin Channing Brown. It's at Austin Channing on Twitter. and who says, I'm not going to do this all day today, so this will be short. I don't care if he was trespassing, breaking windows, stealing material. I don't care if he was disturbing the peace or if he was armed. Hear me good. Perfection is not a standard Black people need to meet to avoid violence. And I think that's something that really sticks with me a lot, right? Because that constant fear of violence is also an impediment to that joy, right? And that's, for me, one of the really important points of like highlighting that joy is moving forward in that way. Anyway, that like had me reflecting on that stuff. But anyway, I talk about the work that I'm doing. So we have a project called Kominote. We consulted the community on the name, and that's one of the ones that that came through that folks liked. For folks who aren't familiar, Montreal does have a large Haitian community. It's like one of the largest immigrant communities in the city. It's where a lot of like people who are new to Quebec are from. And so we thought that it was important to kind of like acknowledge that. And so the name of the program is Kominote, which means community. And basically, our approach was nothing about us without us. And so when we were hired, we were like, first off, we are not the representatives of the community. So anything that we do needs to be we need to consult the community, right? Like that's what it's all about for us. Another thing that we thought was really important is the fact that folks be paid for their labor, because oftentimes, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, like Black communities, as well as so many other marginalized communities, trans communities get this a lot as well. This idea of like where we're just like horribly over researched, where it's always like participate in this research study, do this thing, and it's often like this free labor that we're expected to do in order to improve our living conditions. And we were like, no. People are at least going to get paid a fair wage for the labor, or a fair amount for the labor that they're doing. And so that's something that's been really important to us in implementing this as well. And it's been wonderful. I mean, we're working with, we have the chance to work with Black graphic designers. We're consulting folks from all over the diversity of Montreal's experience. And it really goes to show like what happens when you consult people on things, right? So
yeah, and I just want to ask quickly too, because I'm obviously a little familiar from our conversations, but just a little bit more descriptive as far as the structure. Is it a research project? Is it a discussion group? Like how is this?
So it is a research project. So unlike K1, it is a research project. And so we, again, from this approach of wanting to consult everyone, we were like, we're not going to go out there and create this thing without the active input of the community. And so we've been out here asking the community, what do you want? Like, what is it that you feel would help you meet your needs and things like that? And so I can't really go into too many details about the research itself and the results are, because I'm still going through compiling the data. But I do think it's showing that like there is a massive need for programming for Black men who have sex with men in the city, and things that are inclusive, right? So like our sample was like massively trans inclusive, like much more than the population of trans folks in the city. And I think that that's really a testament to the work that RÉZO has been doing to be actively inclusive of trans men in the recent past, and as well of what it means to hire a Black trans person like myself in order to do that research. And so necessarily that's going to be represented. And I think it's allowing us to have a sample that's a lot more in line with who is going to be accessing services. And so, so we've been working pretty hard. We, again, don't have any idea of what we kind of have an idea, but I can't share it yet, of what the programming is going to look like. But we will be presenting a report to RÉZO's board of directors at the end of this month, and it will be made available online eventually as well once it gets approved by our board. And yeah, so for us, it's been important to recognize that like this has been a largely bilingual project, even though RÉZO's services are mainly operating in French. And that's a result of like the diversity that exists within the community. We, like I mentioned, have a large sample of trans folks. COVID has also caused some very specific issues as well. The thing that shall not be named. I mean, we were actively trying to reach out to all facets of our population and to like serve folks who have expressed a need, right? And so we were like, how do we reach out to that guy who is married with a kid and who like, married to a woman with a kid and who is not accessing services, but is still like hooking up with guys, right? And we know these people. We know them in our social circles. We know them elsewhere. But like, how are we reaching out to them? And COVID has totally messed it up for us because we've been doing our consultations online now. And how are you going to do an hour-long consultation where you're paid and getting mailed a check from a an organization that's for queer and gay and bisexual men when like you're staying at home and your wife is there, you know, like
Yeah.
it adds such an extra level of complexity, and it really is unfortunate. Luckily, we've still been able to consult some of those folks, and largely due to the work of my colleague Gabrielle, who has been extraordinary in reaching out to these populations.
And that's really exciting. And I look forward to the research. It also informing Max K1. I also just wanted to quickly plug too that some of the work I've been doing as well has been with the Black Gay Men's Network of Ontario, which was not a new concept, but there have been some Black queer male leaders that kind of reorganized some previous conversations that have been happening for quite some time, and finally brought quite a few Black women throughout the province together in Toronto. So we're working on creating a centralized hub that's not Toronto-centric, that serves the needs of Black gay men throughout the province. So as I was, talking with some of my fellow committee members, super excited about this conversation and hearing about what's happening in Montreal and what cross-provincial work could look like. So it's exciting to have, more representation, more numbers. As much as I scoff at research because I don't want to do it, I do, I recognize the importance of it. It's needed, right? You need to have those numbers, that data to inform your practice and get that money.
Absolutely. I think that's something that I've been thinking about a lot. And, I think, so the structure of our research, and I think that this like kind of goes into some stuff around the importance of services by us, for us, and that really like cultivated that feeling of Black queer boy joy came up a lot in our consultation. So we've been transcribing all of these into files, and we've been kind of pulling quotes from folks, and I wanted to actually share a few of those quotes because I think they really highlight the importance of this. Of course, these are all anonymous, but these are from folks who have participated, and there's various quotes from different folks, and so I'll just go through and read the three that I have. So one person says, "I think that it's extremely important that the service be offered by and for Black folks. It's important to be able to see yourself reflected in programming through the by and for element. That has to happen." Another quote is, "Programming that isn't by and for doesn't work because people just won't show up." And I'd love to hear what you think about this and how that's played into your stuff with K1. And another quote that I have that I think is really interesting, and it really highlights the importance of having Black folks involved in every single aspect of the research, is this one, where this person says, "I will say that if I had been asked to do this interview by someone who wasn't Black, I would have said no, even though money is being offered. There's a different dynamic in having conversations with white people about being Black that isn't always welcoming. But knowing that every aspect of the project is going to be by Black people makes me more likely to access it, because I know that in doing so, I'm supporting people that would probably be looked over otherwise." I think this gives us a real insight into where folks are and like what the needs are. And I often think we don't take the time to actually consider like what it means for a program to be developed by and for Black folks, like from the beginning. And that's honestly why I'm so excited and so happy that RÉZO is really embarking in this work and moving in that direction, because it really does show that when we empower communities to take ownership of programming, to take ownership of the organization, we're going to see a marked increase of their participation in all areas of our work. And I think that that's something that has been wonderful. And I think I'm hopefully, now that K1 has had so much experience with it, maybe you can talk a bit more as well about like how that's been interacting with
Yeah, for sure. Not that I've ever been afraid of emotions, but also, this COVID thing is maybe more emotional than I would say I've been, and like hearing those quotes, like, I'm brought to tears. So yeah, and sharing some quotes of some also anonymous, but some from folks who have attended the group. And I got these, so we're constantly seeking feedback. And so at the end of the last few years, by precedent, what we've done is ask folks like what they want, what they don't want in this space, ideas for upcoming programs. So these quotes are from the end of 2019's end of year evaluation, but a couple people said, K1 has been a safe place for me to express my real identity, hence encouraging and promoting K1 through letting my friends know that there's a space and everybody is welcome to be themselves. And then someone else added, it's validating and refreshing. I truly feel as if I'm seen here, which can be tough in everyday life. And just really speaking to, adding on to what you're saying, the importance of having informed programming, and also why there needs to be specific programming, for groups. Two things I want to share. I'm trying to decide in my head which one, but in Ottawa, there's a very large study being undertaken about the mental health of Black people in Ottawa. And so I've been fortunate enough to sit on some of the consultation meetings that have been informing the research. So earlier this week, they were sharing some of the preliminary results and where they wanted to go. And one of the things that I'm glad I brought up, because it led to a fruitful discussion, was, it's really great that we're naming anti-Black racism and how it manifests in these services, but also, is there a way that we can build in how we advocate for ourselves when accessing these services, or how do we build capacity to build our own? And this is, more in reference to mental health, but I think that really resonates in everything that we do, right? It's, we need these spaces to talk, share, and learn. And I think one of the offshoots of that has been for folks to find the skills and find the language to then navigate a larger anti-Black world and get what they need, right? Like I think it's really tough as a service provider to say, hey, go to the service, knowing that they may not have a good experience based on what they look like, unless we're also going that step further and saying, this might happen, and this is how you advocate for yourself to get what you need. They might ask this question, here's a way that you can respond to mitigate that and turn that around. And whatnot. And I think those informal things that happen at K1 are so powerful, and seeing that happen. There was a conversation when someone talked about being on PrEP, and the conversation that led to leader just threw the topic out the window, because it was like, oh, like I haven't met a Black gay man on PrEP yet, and I've been scared to. So let's talk about it. And now, there's 2 or 3 more guys that have the knowledge that they need to make better sexual health choices. So yeah, I'm rambling now, but so I'll let you take over. But those spaces are so important.
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's like in creating this group that was initially just meant to be a space for Black folks to network and to kind of connect and feel a sense of community with one another, Black, queer, and trans folks to network and meet each other in this way, has actually led to increased health outcomes, right? Like you have folks who are now like, actually, you know what? I think my sexual behaviors would be like, it would be better for me to like kind of like be on PrEP, for example. And that has led to, and that of course is going to lead to massive differences within the way that like Black queer men understand their health, right? And like it is exactly through facilitating those kinds of conversations in a way that is like culturally adapted and that responds specifically to the needs and desires of the guys that are involved that is going to lead to that. And I love that, to hear that that's happening, and I'm like hoping that that's the thing. One of the things that I think might be important for us to acknowledge, though, and I know I'm very conscious of time, and that we will be taking questions very shortly. I don't believe that we have any just as of yet. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the thing down there. Si vous voulez poser des questions en français, n'hésitez pas. Je vais faire la traduction et on répondra en anglais. Et je peux écrire ma réponse en français. Il n'y a pas de stress. But I think one of the things that's really important, and I think that is something that we've been encountering specifically at RÉZO, is this idea of in doing our programming, we have encountered a lot of we're all equal. Why do you need to do this? Like, why don't they just come to the regular services? And, like all of these things, and this like lack of understanding of how like what it is to be a Black person and having to confront that, right? Like, so if you look at the comments on our Facebook page, and we've been trying to be very transparent around these things and address them as best we can, but we have comments where people are like, yeah, I'm super into Black guys, and start like fetishizing on the comments of our posts, right? And we're like, you shouldn't be doing this, because like I know that like if I saw this organization that was doing programming like this, and all I saw in the comments was people like saying like, oh yeah, I love Black guys and all this stuff, I would be so turned off. I would not want to go there, you know?
Right.
And I think like that's an impact, and people don't understand why that is a big deal, right? And I think like that's something that we've had to respond to, or like a lot of comments around like, we're all the same, so why do we need this? Like, you know, a lot of that like all lives matter kind of rhetoric that I just think is like, that doesn't really understand the fact that like um, a different cultural reality requires different measures to adapt to that, right? And I think instead of being scared of it, what we should be doing is moving towards a greater understanding and saying, wow, hopefully this programming will help to like address this historic whiteness of Montreal's queer community, for example, or to help with representation of Black MSM within programming of community organizations and within like society more generally, right? And I think like these are not the conversations that we're having, and I really do think it's important for us to kind of like use those negative responses to like shift towards there. Another thing that is really tricky is RÉZO's been around for almost 30 years. And so we have this base, right? Like we started out as Action 00, which was an organization that was doing mainly HIV prevention, education work. And now we kind of like, our mandate has since changed to be one of like general health and well-being for gay and bisexual men, cis and trans. And it kind of like, people didn't have a tendency to know that about us. Like people were like, oh yeah, Rezo, you're the one who gives out the condoms, right? Where like, of course, we've been doing so much more. We have like fantastic programming around, you know, mental health services that are like culturally adapted and, you know, trans inclusive and things like that. And people just don't know about it because of this history. I think like one of the wonderful things that Max has going for it is like, when you started, you were like, this is what we are. Like, we are this organization that's all about our health, our well-being, and like taking ownership from it in like a very intersectional way. Which is something that we are still trying to work towards. And it's not that one is better than the other. It's just saying that like it's a different dynamic that we're kind of encountering, and then that's going to have an impact on the way that people interact with us, right? So yeah, I guess I go into a rambling moment, but I guess like, how are you folks dealing with any? Do you get negative responses for your programming in this way? Like, how do you address it? If so, like, yeah.
Yeah. So one of two things is that I think the benefit of MAX in that we was formerly the Ottawa Gay Men's Wellness Initiative, and why it closed and rebranded as MAX was to intentionally be intersectional and recognize that there was groups that weren't being heard. And so, you know, having that organizational support from the, you know, that be the focus is definitely helpful. And in specific to, you know, negative comments in particular about K1, and more so when it first started, it's a challenge for me because I don't want to respond to that. It's not that I don't have an answer to it. It's that if you don't get it, then that's work that you're going to have to do. And of all the things that I have to, you know, worry about and think about as a Black queer person and whatnot, it's I've just decided that I just don't have that much energy unless someone is approaching me in a way in which it's truly meaningful. They want to engage and they want to understand, and then that's something that we can start with. It's interesting too because there's a individual who, it's not that I'm not naming them intentionally, I just don't know how they want to be named publicly, but I'm looking at an article that they recently wrote, and it's under 48T, who's a gentleman that I've been speaking with in Ottawa, who happens to be an Asian queer man, and he's been looking at doing some programming specifically for Asians in the Ottawa area. And it was just, you know, this conversation of like, these two things can coexist. You know, I just don't understand how that doesn't make sense, that like, you know, there being a Black group, you know, hopefully that there's some more services for Asian queer people, that we can coexist and we can also, you know, and support each other. You know what I mean? I'm glad that I don't have the thought process to understand how it must feel to feel like that I have to insert myself in that group without permission.
Yeah.
You know,
it's not a competition. It's not a competition. It's collaboration. We're all working towards that same end goal, right? And I think that's what people oftentimes ignore. And it does get annoying when they find a way to do it, right? Like, I will tell you, one of the things that I can share about our research is that, so we did it in a mixed methods kind of way. So we had an online survey, but we also were doing individual interviews. And so when we would do our promo, we'd post it on our website, we'd post it on our social media, and we would say, RÉZO is developing programming for Black men for Black guys who are into guys. Are you a Black guy who's into guys? Fill out this survey, kind of thing. Basically, like, easy translation there. And the amount, I mean, like, I can confirm to you that 65% of the people who responded to the survey were not Black. Like, I was like, and it was like written very clearly in English and French, like on all of the instances, and people still tried to like insert themselves in it, right? And I think what's something that's really interesting about it is this idea of like, I have a feeling that like services for like LGBTQ plus populations, very specifically, have had a tendency to be very haven't focused on any inequities that can come up around like racial and ethnic background, and so as a result have defaulted into this sort of whiteness. Not saying that it's their fault, but what I'm saying is that it's been something that has been historically overlooked, and it's something that we need to be addressing. And so now we've created a thing where it's like our clientele can't even imagine that there's programming that wouldn't be geared towards them, right? And like, what does that mean in terms of the way that they interact with us in the future, right? I mean, like, we saw very similar stuff when we started our programming for trans men, right? Where people were like, do I belong in this? People who fetishize trans guys were trying to come in and access services in that way in order to like meet trans guys. And, we were like, this isn't where it is. I think there's like a learning curve there. And finally, one of the things I will say about the project is like, yeah, I'm tired. I don't want to have to be the person who's doing all that education work. It's exhausting to be the one who has to call it out within the organization and things like that. And one of the things that I love about the structure of our research project right now is one of the requirements that we have is that we develop a training for community organizations to specifically talk about the realities of Black, queer, and trans men in the city, which is one of the things that I'm going to be working on this summer, which I'm super excited for. But we want to take it a step further. And I also think it's really important that as Black folks, we take our experience and we translate that into something that our colleagues can understand and then make them deal with the work. I'm like, I don't want to have to go through the consistent re-traumatization of racist comments, of like arguing in this kind of way. I think it's something that is very harmful for me, and that I'm able to name, especially as someone who's like hyper aware of a lot of these issues. And so what I can do is like talk to my colleagues and be like, hey, did you know that like folks in my research are mentioning that they don't access services with us because XYZ? Or hey, did you know that like Black folks have generally named that they're uncomfortable accessing services within community organizations generally? Or like, hey, do you know, like that kind of stuff, right? And providing them with the tools, right? Because like, I do trust my colleagues, right? And I know that I can have that conversation with them in a way that is like, I'll have the conversation with you and then I'm washing my hands of it. And then I'm like, you can have fun dealing with the racism.
Yeah. We need allies and accomplices. In both measures, which is, I have to give credit to Jade Pink, who based in Ottawa, but she grew up in Nova Scotia. She's Black Nova Scotian, an Indigenous trans and two-spirit person who I just always brings the knowledge. And, she's always quick to point that out. We need accomplices. We need, not just allies. We need people to actually do the work. So that we can live and breathe. Which I think, I don't see any questions yet on the Facebook page, which it's no big deal because it gives us more time to talk. But I am excited about to ask the next question. And I think it's a nice segue in referencing Jade works at Kind Space. But certainly, as I was saying before in our introduction, right, this isn't new, right? There's been Black queer organizing for a long time. So what other groups or organizations, are you excited about working with? What's going on with Black queer organizing in Montreal that you think is going to be a great way to synergize?
Well, of course, like I don't think you can talk about Black queer organizing in Montreal without mentioning Massimadi, the film festival, the LGBTQ plus Afro film festival that happens every February, of which Laurent Lafontaine has been doing an absolutely fantastic job. So shout out. Also want to point out the work of Dr. Omi Dryden, who's formerly based in Toronto, now is based in Halifax, and who's doing a research study called the #GotBlood to Give study in Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, and Halifax, aiming to understand the barriers to blood donation for African, Caribbean, and Black men who have sex with men. And so I'm really excited to see how that work kind of translates, and what integrating into the community for them has been like. Unfortunately, one of the main groups that was doing work within Black, queer, and trans communities, Arc-en-Ciel d'Afrique, African Rainbow, closed recently.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, which is a shame, but I mean, like, and I think this is really telling about like the priorities of the current government in terms of funding and things like that, because that was one of the main reasons why this happened. So yeah, super excited for their work. And also a big shout out to GEPV, who has a tendency to work with, who worked with Haitian communities in HIV prevention, and mainly did it through churches, which is fantastic work that I don't think many queer organizations are very familiar with. But the church is super important to a lot of people, right? And so how do we outreach to those folks? And so they just hired an MSM outreach worker for their organization, which I think is like a really beautiful way of kind of melding everything together, and really targeting the needs of that community as well. So wonderful stuff like that. Also, just thinking about like spaces that aren't explicitly queer, but who are of course like very queer friendly, is the work of Gabriela, who has been doing amazing work with the Racine bookstore, calling out the fact that there are no bookstores in the city that are by Black folks for Black folks. And what do those spaces look like for us? And she's been doing amazing work in maintaining a bookstore in Montreal Nord, a historically Black community, and a currently very Black community in Montreal, where we actually did the launch for our event. And we think it's just beautiful to see, and really important that we are able to like support each other as community, and to, kind of build those links, even when they might not seem the most apparent. Like a bookstore doesn't seem like a really relevant space, but like when we think about all that brings, and we think about all the ways in which like Gabriela's work with Racine has tried to make it so queer and trans inclusive, it's very important for us to like support community members who are doing that kind of work. So yeah, how about you folks?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Ottawa has more going on than I think people think. I feel like because of like the Ottawa Black queer spokesperson, but I've been living in Ottawa to be 4 years this summer, and since that time, very fortunate to know Lydia Collins, who is at one of our healthcare centers. She's the ACB HIV prevention strategy worker. She also happens to be a Black queer woman. Also working with Keegan, who's one of their educators, also a Black queer individual. So they've been doing a really good job spearheading a lot of spaces and work for Black queer people to exist and have open discussions around, just holistic health, not just sexual health, for sure. Kind Space, which is kind of our the general LGBTQ organization. Carling and Jade, who I mentioned before, have been doing a lot of work of getting a lot more QPOC and Black organizing off the ground, particularly thinking of Apocalypse, which is a bi-weekly movie group where folks can get together, watch movies that have been either featured or have been made by racialized folks, and have a discussion afterwards. Serving as a really great space. And one thing that's I'm anxious for COVID to go away, and that there's some folks who started at a Cap City Kiki Ballroom scene. So similar to Montreal and Toronto, there was some groundwork in getting that off the ground. We were actually, not me personally, but the organizers were having rehearsals every Friday night. So hoping to get that restarted, and hopefully have our first ball soon. And certainly, how do you speak about Black queer anything without without mentioning Ballroom, for sure. And I know William, Lydia, and some other folks have been a part of that. So there's a lot going on. And I think one thing that's difficult for me sometimes too, being in Canada, is everything's so siloed. And it's, more so than when I was as a nurse case manager. It's just like in the States, it's just like, it's not a competition, as I was saying before. Like, we can work together. Like, there can be Black queer film spaces, there can be Black queer film spaces. Speaking of which, a lot of Black film organizing as well. And I do want to shout out Full Film Organization and also Pass the Vibes, which is a DJ collective of mostly Black queer women, also doing some really amazing things.
Yeah, I think one of the groups that I forgot to mention specifically, and I think you brought it up, and it's perfect, is the Montreal Kiki Ballroom Alliance as well.
Mm-hmm.
Really ensuring that the history of ballroom and the way that it's rooted in Black trans experiences and Black queer experiences is really highlighted through in the city. And so all of these dance teachers who are going through this and who are teaching folks and who are really like highlighting like the importance of keeping this alive and keeping our community alive in this way is super key. And I've always seen them making space for Black trans folks, for Black queer folks, and I think like it's important for us to highlight them. Also looking forward to working with them in the future, fingers crossed. So I also am noticing that we are already over time.
I know, so it's time to wrap things up. I'm sad. I could keep talking all day, but I don't think. I think eventually people will tune out.
But I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. I'd love to continue this collaboration in the future. I think that we definitely will be working together in the near future on programming and on how ensuring that we're able to share our strategies and really build community across provincial borders. And so that's something that I think is really important. But before we go, I was just kind of wondering if there's anything that y'all needed to plug, that you wanted to plug, and be like, hey, like what's going on at MAX?
So what's going on at MAX is that we are hiring a harm reduction program coordinator. So there's still time to send your resume to info@maxottawa.ca. We have a ton of new volunteer positions that we've recently posted to the website. So if you go to maxottawa.ca/get involved, you'll see those. Plenty of opportunities to volunteer even from home. Even more so from home, as we've been able to do a lot of virtual programming. Lastly, I wanted to put a plug in for the PRIMP study. What they are currently recruiting HIV negative, gay, bisexual, queer, and other guys into guys who live in Toronto, Hamilton, and Ottawa to do interviews for PrEP. There's opportunities to make up to $150. And if you want more information about that, Mark from University of Toronto can follow up. His email is Mark.Gaspar, Gaspar @utoronto.ca. And we did list that under our COVID response page on taking care of your mental health. So you can check that resource out as well. What about you, Vincent? Anything to plug?
Always. So RÉZO's been doing a whole bunch of really exciting stuff recently, and I think it's really important for us to highlight it. Specifically, we have actually developed a partnership with MAX Ottawa and with a group in Edmonton as well to translate an initial tool that we'd created, which was monbuzz.ca. It's now mybuzz.ca, mybuzz.ca, and it's basically a resource that's meant to connect you with a counselor if you're having issues with addiction. And so if you're having any issues with substance use in combination with your sex life, so we can think here of like, we think about like, if you're having issues with like poppers, alcohol, crystal meth, coke, anything like that, like, and the way that it interacts with your sex life, you can actually do a quick little quiz online and determine like whether this is something that you might want to consider seeking help about. And if so, we can put you immediately into contact with an outreach worker. We also have folks at RÉZO who are part of the ARC program, which is Accès rapide pour des consultations en santé mentale, which is quick access to mental health consultations, where we offer pay what you can related, or not as much pay what you can, adapted to your revenue, counseling services with either a social worker, a sexologist, a psychotherapist, or anyone like that for 8 to 10 sessions. Going to free until about, I believe it's $80 a session. Don't quote me on that. If you're interested in signing up, we are still taking folks. And so you can go to RÉZO's website at rezosante.org for more information about that. We also just launched the HOT guide, le guide HOT, in French. It's currently not translated into English, but it's a guide that is the fruit of my colleague Etienne, who has been doing absolutely fantastic work as an agent who basically similar to what I was doing, but for trans men. And they developed this guide that was made for trans guys and for cis guys. So basically one side is like a guide for trans guys who are interacting within like mainstream like gay and bisexual men's spaces, and like what does it mean to navigate those spaces, what does it mean to access hormones, what does it mean to interact with cis guys in like a sexual way. And then when you flip the guide over, on the other side there's a guide for cis guys who are who have like potentially like connected with a trans guy and who are interested in like, what do I do, what questions should I ask, what questions should I not ask, you know, like those kinds of resources and things like that, as well as answering questions so that the guy that you're hooking up with doesn't have to answer them for you, which is absolutely wonderful. Big shout out to Etienne and all of his work. The Kominote project is going to be around, so check our Facebook page for more info about that. And finally, we have and have had for a while some consent and intimate partner violence campaigns that we've been working on that specifically talk about the needs for gay and bisexual men to address consent and intimate partner violence within our communities. So all of that information is available on our website, which we're working on getting translated into English, but is currently only available in French. And if you have any other questions or comments, or you just want to reach out, you can also email me directly at vincent@rezosante.org.
Wonderful, thanks. And I'm looking forward to continuing some of this conversation tomorrow, because you're going to be joining us at K1 tomorrow. So if you're an ACD guy in the capital region area, feel free to shoot me an email, r.allsbury@maxottawa.ca, or you can message Max on any of our social media platforms, and I can get you the link to sign up for that. And I'm super excited. I can't wait. Nice way to spend a Saturday afternoon. And I think that's it for today.
Yeah, well, thank you for such a wonderful conversation and this opportunity to work together. I feel like we don't often have it, like Quebec has a tendency to be in its own little bubble a lot of the time, and it's really nice to break out of that and to hear what's happening in Ottawa and what's happening also in the rest of Canada. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
I think the pleasure's all mine. Thank you. And it's really nice. I know that we have floated in the stratosphere and crossed paths, sort of. So it's really nice to have a sit down and sort of face to face to catch up and get to know each other better.
Nice.
And yeah, so the pleasure's all mine. So with that, if you do have any questions about the conversation, don't hesitate to reach out to Vincent, myself, and or Max or Rezo. We'll be happy to follow up. And everyone have a great afternoon. Take care of yourself. Hopefully you can get some sunshine.
It's 28 degrees in Montreal. You better believe I'm going to the park right now.
All right, go do it, girl.
Merci.
All righty. Take care.
Au revoir.